I could have killed them all. I could have killed you. In town, you're the law. Out here, it's me. Don't push it. Don't push it, or I'll give you a war you won't believe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Cine-Files. Wow, it's weird to introduce myself first, but I am a writer, producer, and host, and my name is John Rocha, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Steve Morris.
Well, I mean, I am Steve Morris, and I am a filmmaker and directing instructor. But John, we usually open up the episode by saying that each week we enter the world of a great film and we explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today, John.
You're right. You know what? You're much more practiced at doing this than I am, but I am still excited to be leading this thing in a way for this episode. So I apologize that I left off our big thing at the beginning, explaining what our podcast is. And for those who join us every week, thanks. I beg your understanding and forgiveness ahead of time, because this is the first time since Hoosiers where I have taken the lead in doing doing a film. And it's very similar to Hoosiers in a way, because this is a film from the 1980s, one of my favorite films, a film that I can go back and rewatch multiple times and still works on me today because of the themes and the story and the questions that it asks of us as viewers. And I think at times it gets unfairly forgotten because of all the other installments that came afterwards. And today we're talking about, if you haven't read the title, 1982's First Blood, or as the kids call it nowadays, Rambo First Blood. Steve, we usually ask what was your first experience? But I want to ask you, what are your thoughts about the movie as you have, whenever you've heard the name, whenever you've heard the title, what are the things that have come into your mind?
I think that this first movie in the series is more different from the rest of the series than any other series I can think of. And it's so interesting to me because I think Sylvester Stallone created two amazing characters that were both serious films.
Yeah.
And in both cases, the series evolved. But in this case, the series went to just a completely different place, you know? And because I think John Rambo is, nothing's ever going to beat Rocky Balboa for me in terms of a character that I just deeply love. But I think John Rambo is an incredible character and a really important one, particularly in this movie.
Yes, I think for many of us who grew up at a certain time in the 1980s, this character is a formidable character. I don't think a lot of us were conscious of Rocky Balboa, who are maybe under 9 years old or 8 years old, in terms of the level of its importance of the character. But when you're getting into your teenage years or the beginning of your young adult years, John Rambo becomes a name that you hear because of this movie. An hour-and-a-half movie, what is considered by many people one of the best action films ever made, because there's reasoning and purpose behind the action that goes on in this movie, much more than there is on subsequent other installments in the franchise, but also other action films that Sylvester Stallone has been a part of. This one spoke volumes, like the first Rocky spoke volumes, about the human condition, about the human experience, about being a person who is considered lesser than or an underdog and trying to fit in or trying to find their place in a society. And I think it's fascinating to see the connection between Rocky and First Blood here. Even though Rocky, of course, won Best Picture, First Blood was not nominated for anything. No. But still, there's a specialness to this movie that I think you can always go back to and say, well, this is what Sylvester Stallone has always been capable of. The first Rocky movie and this First Blood movie as well.
Well, I think it's funny. Your statement of this is what Sylvester Stallone has always been capable of.
Yeah.
I have a strange reaction to that statement, because I don't know that he's capable of that now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think
maybe. Yes.
I mean, look, I think Sylvester Stallone is an unbelievably talented person, but I also think that it's funny. I'm going to make a weird comparison.
Okay.
But it's always strange to me when a creator doesn't understand what was great about the thing they created in the first place,
right,
on some levels. And George Lucas being one who, when he went to write the prequels, it's like, how did you do this thing so well?
Yes.
And then you did it not so well. I think Stallone got seduced by certain grandiose things, like the way that Rocky became better looking and the fights became longer and the montages became longer and the humanness got less. In this, the action sequences get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's what Stallone is really into, is delivering the most ridiculous, over-the-top action sequences, and that's not what makes First Blood great to me.
It's funny you say that, because in doing research for this particular episode, I watched a number of interviews with Stallone talking about specifically First Blood, or looking back on the franchise, and a lot of those came from Last Blood, when he was promoting Rambo Last Blood, which I was very honored to interview him for twice, which was one of the life highlights to have Sylvester Stallone say to me, "That's an astute question, John." Like that blew my mind that he would say something so nice to me asking a question. But listening to him talk about this stuff on that junket and on other interviews, he is very clear that Rambo First Blood is a film that he would not change one thing about, and it's a perfect film. And he even admits that in his mind, a perfect film, and even admits that the subsequent installments, they just went off the, I don't want to say reservation, but they went off the grid, I guess, in essence, of what had made it work so well, and chase the dollars, chase the action money, chase getting people in the seats. And he says himself, I lost the human element of the character. So at least he's self-aware enough to understand why the franchise lost the plot in a lot of ways, because it didn't couple the emotion and have something to say with the action. And I think when he talks about Rambo, which is I think the fourth installment, that kind of announced him coming back to this character, and people liked that movie because it felt like it was kind of having shades of what he'd done with First Blood. But I think you're 100% right. Like Rocky Balboa and Rambo, ironically, the names of the characters here in the installments of each franchise, had shades of what made the franchise so great from the first installments of their franchise. But you might be right that Stallone can't quite recapture that anymore, because he's a different person now. He's been through different things, and his writing style and what he creates now, unfortunately, he can't find that little element that made it so great for First Blood and for Rocky.
Well, think about where he is when he makes Rocky. I mean, Rocky is a film out of desperation.
Yes.
The guy's eating dog food out of a can.
Yes.
And he's living a life where he doesn't have any money, and he's struggling, and he feels like his moment has passed. And so all of that humanity goes into Rocky. And even though First Blood is a few years later and he's more successful, there's still so much of, I feel like, and I don't know, because spoiler alert to everyone who's listening, unlike most of the times when we do the podcast, I've done zero research. I did read the book First Blood, but I actually know nothing about how this movie came about. But my sense is that Stallone felt a genuine, real connection to Vietnam vets coming home from the war.
100%.
And I feel that human connection. And the thing is like, the other thing we can't discount about where Stallone goes is the studio system, is that the studios go, let's have Rocky fight a Russian, and we'll have the Cold War in a Rocky movie. That couldn't be more divorced from the origins on the street of the character Rocky Balboa. And the same is true in Rambo. It's like, let's have him go back to Vietnam and find POWs, and let's have him fight terrorists, and let's have him, like, Rambo goes from being this superhuman character to being a superhero, because, and maybe that's not Stallone. Maybe that's just what the studio wanted to give him money to do.
Yeah. Well, before we dive into the incredible story of how this film came to be, Steve, I got to ask you, what was your do you remember seeing Rambo First Blood for the first time? Where were you? What is your experience in seeing it the first time?
Didn't see it in the theater, rented it, and it was one of those, like, and I wish I could remember which guy it was. It might have been Jeff Johnson, but one of my close friends who went, "Dude, you haven't seen First Blood?" And I was in high school, so it's like, probably 84 or 85, and brought it over and watched it. And it so coincides. That moment, mid high school, is when my brain started to get dark, because that's when Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen come out, is like 86. That's where, RoboCop is 87, I think. Like that era where I started to really want to get into the dark and more violent and more angry parts of entertainment. And so First Blood, it just went into that same rotation with Escape from New York and Big Trouble in Little China and The Terminator, and like, of just the movies that the guys would always have, and we would always rent them and we would watch them over and over again.
Right. For me, it was on beta. Like you, I didn't see it in the theaters. My father, who was a house painter at the time, would occasionally barter for services. Right, like I think I've told this
Sure.
on the show before. Like my father once painted a older person's house because they couldn't afford to pay him in exchange for an entire fleet of Encyclopedia Britannicas
There
because
you go.
he wanted his children to learn. Now they were out of date by about 20 years, but there was still a lot of information in those Britannicas. And so we would watch that, or we read them rather, and then report back to Pops about whatever we read.
But by the way, can I digress very quickly
Please.
just because of that story, which is my mom has a set of the Book of Knowledge from like the 1920s.
Yeah.
And they are awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to put two words together that don't make any sense at all. They're so racist and like white Euro centered. And it's just reading, and that's why I say putting that phrase with awesome.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, but it so gives you a window into like, this is how Europeans and Americans saw the world in 1925 or whatever year those things came out. So anyway, sorry for the digression.
No, just connecting that up to say that my father painted a person's room, and in exchange, that person gave him a Beta Max player with a box of beta tapes in them.
Wow.
So this is before VHS, kids. There was a thing called Betamax, and that and arguably better quality than VHS.
Yeah.
VHS was just cheaper to make, therefore it beat the betas in the long run. But I loved watching that, and we had in the box was Rocky III, The Verdict, Broadcast News, and First Blood. And so that was my first exposure to First Blood. And I just remember that I was maybe 13, 14 years old. That film put the zap in me, and I watched it on repeat over and over and over again. I imagine Rocky III and that movie are why I became such a massive fan of Sylvester Stallone and still am to this day. And so watching it, and I remember that experience sitting there in the living room with my brother, with my dad, watching it and just being blown away by what we were watching, being caught up in it. And I always have had this like social, political bent, even when I was a kid. And I remember having this discussion and, kind of talking to people at school about it. So I just remember that and my history teachers, I remember talking to them about First Blood. So it was a film that kind of woke me up to this idea of what happened to these Vietnam veterans and the reaction that the public had to them. And also, as I said, reaffirmed my appreciation and love for Sylvester Stallone. So, Steve, it's based on the book. Let's get into a little pre-production here before we get into the movie. It's based on the book by David Morrell, which came out in 1972, right in the middle or right near the tail end of the Vietnam War. And Steve, you've read the book. Do you want to give a little bit more? I don't want to say a book report, but do you want to give like a little bit of background of what goes on in the book between these characters, Sheriff Will Teasel and John J. Rambo? Oh, actually, Rambo. He's not John Jay in that. Yeah.
He is just Rambo. Yeah. So I'll share some of it as we go along because it does certainly follow very much the same structure as the movie. The biggest thing I would say is that there are reasons that we sometimes say, oh, the book is better than the movie. You got to read the book. And there are reasons sometimes where you need to say, oh, the movie is better than the book. And this is a perfect example. It's not that I'm saying it's badly written. I don't think it's badly written. I think he's a good writer. And in terms of the syntax and the language and stuff like that, and his understanding of the characters, it's well done.
Right.
But the big difference is that you're in the heads of Rambo and the sheriff.
Right.
And because you are in their heads, you know everything that they're thinking. And this movie is so much stronger because you don't.
Right.
It is so much stronger because Rambo he's blank. He's not speaking. And because of that, it pulls you in so much more to his character. And the same is true with the sheriff. And so I would say it is so much better suited to the movie. That's the first thing. And the second thing is they do a lot, and I'll get into it as we get into the story. But they do so much more to make Rambo more sympathetic. Mm-hmm. By just subtle changes to choices that he makes that make a huge difference in terms of the story.
All right, well, let's get into the story of how it took 10 years for this movie to finally get made and come out, because in 1972, when the book came out, Columbia Pictures bought the rights to the book at the behest of producer Lawrence Terman. This is a guy who produced The Graduate, The Great White Hope, would go on to produce The Thing, Short Circuit, Running Scared, one of my favorite 1980s comedies, and American History X for a former guest on our show who wrote the American History X. So an interesting connective tissue here. But the Columbia Pictures bought it for $75,000, the rights here. They had Richard Brooks attached to direct, and Richard Brooks directed Blackboard Jungle, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Elmer Gantry, The Professionals, and a 1970s kind of classic here, Looking for Mr. Goodbar. There, and then John Calley, and then it was in turn over like a year. He was supposed to deliver a 115-page script that never happened, and then eventually moved off the project. John Calley at Warner Brothers then bought the project from Columbia for $125,000, wanted to bring in Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro to test to play John Rambo, and Martin Ritt had agreed to direct it from a script by Walter Newman. So a lot of old Hollywood dancing around this thing. And the thing I didn't say about Richard Brooks, he wanted to have Betty Davis as a psychiatrist who is counseling John Rambo about what he's going through. So this at the time, remember, this is the 70s, so they were kicking around the idea of bringing some of these older actors to be a part of it, and certainly one older actor we're going to talk about a little bit as we go a little bit further into the story of this. So in the version,
can I jump in real fast?
Yeah.
So two things about it. One, I just want to point out, like, this is something that people who have listened to the show have now probably figured out, but we don't know what we're doing in Hollywood. And and frequently when someone buys a book, what they're buying is the story, is that just the basic idea, Vietnam veteran fighting a sheriff somewhere in the wilderness.
Right.
And then what they do with it, we don't know. And I can picture the fucking meeting with the executive. How are we going to know what Rambo's thinking? I know. Let's get a psychiatrist to talk to them to explain everything that we don't understand about and so they go down there. And of course, that sounds like Betty Davis and like a psychic. Why would you ever do that? Because we have the movie. We know how it works, but you didn't know how it worked before they went to make it. And the other thing I wanted to say is fucking Rambo with De Niro and Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah.
I could totally see that movie.
Oh, we're not done. We're not done with
I'm ready.
Who could have potentially played Rambo and Troutman and Teasel. So, but yes, I mean, Betty Davis just, you're crazy, darling. You're crazy. I don't know. It would be interesting. Anyway, Walter Newman wrote 3 drafts, and in his version, both Rambo and the sergeant died, and Troutman, who is considered, quote, the true villain of the piece by Martin Ritt, was allowed to live, and Ritt wanted Robert Mitchum to play Sheriff Will Teasel, and Paul Newman to play Rambo.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's totally different. Spoiler alert, by the way, I was going to save this to the end, but in the book, they both die.
Yes, they both die in the book.
Yeah.
At one point, the studio also wanted Chris Christopherson for Rambo. People don't remember that Chris was kind of being looked at in the 70s as a possible leading man. He'd done A Star is Born with Barbra Streisand, the version of that story. Gene Hackman as Sheriff Teasel, maybe teasing what we would do later in Unforgiven, and Lee Marvin as Colonel Troutman. If you can't get me Richard Crenna, Lee Marvin seems like the perfect choice there, Steve.
Oh, you're going to be offended, but I'd pick Lee Marvin over Richard Crenna. No disrespect to Richard Crenna. He's good in the movie, but Lee Marvin, come on.
I mean, you're a big Lee Marvin fan.
Exactly.
But Lee Marvin turns it down because he didn't want to be typecast. Having played that already in Dirty Dozen and other things, he just didn't want to be a part of it. Then producer Carter DeHaven optioned the project from Warner Brothers for $25,000, got John Frankenheimer attached as a director for this. Then they were looking at Powers Booth, Nick Nolte, and Michael Douglas for John J. Rambo. So these are the amount of people that are going around in this. They eventually settle on Brad Davis to be John Rambo, who, of course, was coming off Midnight Express at the time in 1978. The Cinema Group was set to finance, and Filmways was set to distribute. But before filming started, Filmways was taken over by Orion, and the movie goes into limbo, and Brad Davis gets moved off the project. Well, in 1977 now, Will Sackheim gets involved, the producer Will Sackheim. He wrote a script with Michael Kozel. Sackheim wanted to make the film with director John Badham, who had done Deliverance, and this would star John Travolta as Rambo, George C. Scott as Colonel Troutman, and Gene Hackman or Charles Durning as the sheriff. And Sackheim spent 8 months on the project, but could not get it financed. Stop there, Steve, before we get to the last part about how this finally happened. Would you take George C. Scott or Lee Marvin as your Colonel Troutman?
I'm sticking. Look, they're both awesome. That's an impossible choice. My gut is that I still kind of like Lee Marvin more for the part.
Yeah.
But George C. Scott would be amazing. I just want to point out too. We just released a shorts compilation out into the world, and the first piece on that shorts compilation was talking about the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA strike. And one of the things we talked about is how much work actors and writers put in to a project that they never get any fucking money for.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example. Every one of these now maybe some of the directors were getting development money, maybe they weren't. Maybe screenwriters are coming in. Actors might have, they spent a whole bunch of time working out their schedules so they can film the Rambo movie, and then it falls through, and this goes on for a decade.
Right.
This is why it's important that we get paid, because we're actually working a lot all the time when we're not getting paid.
And this is worse now than it ever was. And you were getting paid, and you at least got paid more in the 1970s, comparably to what these writers are getting paid nowadays, which is the sad truth of it. So after all of this, Mario Kassar and Andrew G. Vajna of Anabasis Investments read the book. They get interested in doing an adaptation as the first production for, drumroll here, Kuroko Pictures. Remember Kuroko Pictures.
Sure.
So they purchased the film rights from Warner Brothers for $375,000 and Sackheim and Kozol's script for $125,000 in 1981. Ted Kotcheff, who had been involved with the project back in 1976, returns to direct this. They get it financed, and Ted Kotcheff offers the role of John Rambo to Sylvester Stallone, and the actor accepts it after reading a script over the weekend. And here's the point about this with Stallone. In Morell's book, Rambo kills many of his pursuers, things like 16 people, or many of his pursuers. Kozol and Sackheim's script had him killing 16 people, but in the movie, Rambo does not directly cause the death of any police or National Guardsmen, and that's because of Stallone. Stallone comes in, he does 7 final drafts of the script, and by the time they have a final script, along with some help from Larry Gross and David Giler, 26 rewrites of the script have happened by the time they start shooting the movie. But they have their director, they have their star, they have their producers. And just when they're about to go into production, one of their producers has a heart attack, and Buzz Fetchins comes in to produce the movie. So what's a story just to end up on day one shooting it? And just to add a little more to the story, they had cast Kirk Douglas to play Colonel Troutman. And Kirk Douglas had been working on the script, and he apparently, according to Stallone and according to Ted Kotcheff as the director, he was stealing lines from the other characters in the script because he was doing rewrites of his lines, even though they hadn't started shooting, and he wanted to take all the lines that were good lines for himself. And this is how he left the project a day before they were about to start shooting it. And the reason he left the project is because he wanted Colonel Troutman, Kirk Douglas wanted his Colonel Troutman to kill Rambo, then leave in Will Teasel's police car, adjust the rear view mirror to show him wearing Rambo's headband. And the implication was that Troutman had become, quote, possessed by Rambo's spirit of killing him, and was headed down the same self-destructive path as his former soldier. And so when Stallone came in and looked at that and was like, no. We're going to make Rambo much more sympathetic. I'm very aware of Vietnam veterans and the things that they've been suffering. We can do this with this character. We don't have to have him kill anybody. We should understand that there are so many people who went to Vietnam who were used by their country and then ignored when they came back. And we have a chance to say something with this character and with this movie. This pissed off Kirk Douglas, and he left the project one day before they were about to start shooting. And they went to Rock Hudson, and Hudson had considered it, but he was recovering from open heart surgery, so he had to turn it down. And at the last minute, they got Richard Crenna to agree to it. And in the first scene where you see Richard Crenna talking to Will Teasel, which is an iconic scene, he is being fed the lines by a production coordinator because he hadn't had a chance to memorize the lines. And that's how finally, we get everybody on set to start shooting First Blood.
Okay, so I have a lot to process.
It's a lot, man.
The first thing I'll say is the Kirk Douglas of it all is nuts. That's
right.
And this is so one of the weird things has got to be when you go from being one of the biggest movie stars in the world, who has been in charge of his giant projects like Spartacus, and now you're playing a supporting part, but you still feel like a movie star. No one went up to Kirk. I mean, this is after he doesn't do Cuckoo's Nest. This is after, a bunch of stuff. And the thing is like Stallone is doing exactly what Kirk Douglas is doing.
Yeah.
I get the script. I'm not happy with the direction it's going. I'm going to rewrite it. Stallone, really good writer, obviously, or capable of being a really good writer.
Sure. Yeah.
And the choices he makes in terms of reducing the death count.
Yeah.
That's critical to why this movie is better than the book.
100%. 100%.
The other thing about it is like that stuff you described at the end of him putting the headband on and all that stuff. Like that's also the difference between a studio or an older generation or a corporation going, I know what a Vietnam vet is like. And someone who actually probably talked to Vietnam vets and had friends who were Vietnam vets and had deep, real sympathy for them. And that is the difference, And so that is why it's great. I love Kirk Douglas. You love Kirk Douglas.
Yes.
I'm really glad he's not in this movie.
I am as well. And clearly there was no bad blood because Kirk Douglas was an Oscar. So not that that's a good movie or anything, but he ends up
not coming to the Cine-Files anytime soon.
No, not even as a guilty pleasure. James Garner was also looked at for Troutman and turned it down. He was a veteran of the Korean War, had 2 Purple Hearts, but he did not want to play a man who comes home from war and starts fighting the police. He did not like that as a part of this movie. We are definitely going to talk about that and the implications of that in 1982 in this movie. Here are 3 names who were briefly considered for Colonel Troutman, and Stallone threatened to quit the movie if any of these people were cast as Troutman to replace Kirk Douglas. Jackie Mason, Milton Berle, and Charles Nelson Riley.
What? You know what's funny about doing this, and I'm having a great time, John, and you're doing, by the way, an excellent job. This has been awesome. But what's so funny is like, I don't know if you had this thought, but I frequently when I'm doing my research will go, oh, I can't wait to tell John this.
Yes.
He's going to love this. I mean, what the fuck were they thinking?
That for last.
But again, I'm going to make the same point I make before. We don't know what we're doing. Yeah. And sometimes you get notes from the studio or from a producer that are just so absolutely insane. I remember one where we were doing Back to the Future, and I can't remember what the note was, but they got some note from the studio that I think changing the title into some horrible, horrible title. And they get the note, and Spielberg is looking at it because he's the executive producer, and he's with Zemeckis and the other writer who's also named Bob, whose name I don't remember. And they go, what the fuck are we going to do? This is the worst title I've ever seen, or name, or whatever it is. We can't do this. And Spielberg goes, here's what I'm going to do. And he writes to the studio head or whoever it was and says, that was so hilarious. Thanks so much for sending it. We all laughed. You brightened up all of our days. And the guy never mentioned it again.
Well, there we go. Now we arrive at finally this thing being shot. It was shot in Hope, British Columbia, even though it's set in Hope, Washington. As we said, the idea of all of this, I think, is an interesting process to study about how long it takes. 26 rewrites on this before it finally starts shooting. But Steve, I've listed a number of names, whether they were right for the role or not. It tells you something about this film was special, that so many talented people, and not flashes in the pan, but talented people with great resumes were considered to play these roles or were interested to play these roles. Al Pacino was interested in playing this, but turned it down because they didn't make Rambo crazy enough for him. And Dustin Hoffman was considered as well, but didn't feel like he wanted to do a film here where he is attacking the police and taking that stuff on. So a lot in here, a lot of names rather that were kicked around to possibly play these roles. So, what can you say? It's a crazy process, But a lot of talented people were interested in being a part of this movie. And then Stallone ends up being the lead.
So, as you know, I am not a fan, and I'm very concerned about AI
Yes.
creating creating representations of people so it can make new movies with the likenesses of people. And I think that is a terrible thing. But when you said that, the image of someone doing an AI version of Rambo starring Dustin Hoffman was something I suddenly really wanted to see what that would look like.
Well, Steve, after this entire 30 minutes of the behind the scenes and pre-production of how this came to be, shall we jump in First Blood?
I am ready. I am excited.
Let's do it. All right, we open with that iconic score from Jerry Goldsmith, a score that some people don't give enough credit to in the Jerry Goldsmith resume, but I personally love. We hear that lone trumpet as we see Rambo come around the corner, walking down a dirt path with a bag slung over his shoulder, his green army jacket on. And I was reading a review from Jerry Goldsmith online, and the person who reviewed the soundtrack said that the trumpet, Jerry Goldsmith, the trumpet is Rambo, standing out amongst the instruments, wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting you to notice him. And so that's a fascinating aspect of the soundtrack and the score as you're watching the movie. Rambo comes upon a house, sees some kids playing by a huge lake. He walks down, asks the kids if they know if Delmore Berry lives there. He walks back to the back of a house. A woman is there with what I think is her daughter, or maybe Delmore Berry's daughter, it might be her granddaughter.
Can you tell me this? Where Delmar Barry lives?
He ain't here.
And then Rambo tells the woman that Barry is a friend of his and gave him this address. He shows his writing, Delmore Berry's writing, to prove that he knows him. He introduces himself as John Rambo and that he served with Delmar in Vietnam.
I've got a picture of us together.
Pulls out a photo of them together to prove to the woman that he is who he says he is. And that's when she tells him that Delmar has died.
Died how?
Cancer. Brought it back from Nam. All that orange stuff that spread it around.
This is such a relatively new thing at the time to be talking about Agent Orange in a mainstream movie.
Cut him down to nothing. I could lift him off the sheet.
Rambo is shocked and hurt to hear this news. So, Steve, right off the bat, we have a man, a drifter, walking by himself down the road. Stallone said he approached creating Rambo as a child. He's a man-child.
Yeah.
Who was clearly changed by Troutman and the army to become a Green Beret and a killer. But when we see Rambo for the first time, there is an innocence in his face. There is a joy of seeing like these kids playing. He doesn't come off as mean. He goes down and talks to Delmore Berry's mom and saying, this is the deal. I know him. We served together, all of this. And when he hears the news, and we find out later he is the last of the platoon because of Delmore Berry's death, we see that really change him and affect him as yet another person, another connection to his life in Vietnam where he felt so empowered is gone. And so what are your thoughts about this opening scene here and this introduction of John Rambo?
So first of all, this scene is not in the book. The book doesn't start with this. And I think this is critical to the film in terms of establishing his character. You know, there's that expression of save the cat, which is the idea that in order for us to like your character, we have to have the character do something good at the beginning of the movie. And I don't think that's true. I think there are all sorts of characters that we're fascinated by that don't necessarily do anything good. Yeah. But in this case, in this film, with a guy who's going to be such a scary killer, or we're going to feel that way, it's critical to set up this moment. And there are two things about this scene that I find really powerful. The first is the silence of mom.
Yes.
Is that, and it makes me go and ask you this question. Why? Because she doesn't want to deal with Rambo. When he starts asking about Dale, she's like, I'm not into this.
Yeah.
Why is she like that? What is going on for her?
Because how many people have probably come to ask about him? She's living all by, with her family there on the edge of a lake. And she's probably wounded and hurt by the death of her son in a war that a lot of people at the time felt was a useless war and a war where the soldiers were screwed over by the politicians. So there's a lot that him showing up on her doorstep drudges up for her. And as you said, she takes her time telling him that Delmar is dead. She doesn't say it or surrender it right off the bat. She waits for him to give all this information. And then when he's having this hope that he's going to see Delmore or find out where he is, she says he's dead. And she has this anger and this pain when she talks about how thin he was by the time he died, when Rambo has just said Delmore had to be in the back because his back was so big he'd have covered us all in that picture.
The other thing I find so powerful, and this is, again, this thing, it's not the same thing he does with Rocky Balboa, but there's a similarity in the sense that you can feel with Rambo in this scene that he is filled with emotion. Like the emotion of how important this connection was, this friend of his was, that this was his brother, how far he's walked, how far he's come, how much pain he's experienced since coming back from Vietnam, how difficult it is. And that and there's this thing that Rocky talks a lot. And I think there's a similar, Rambo does not talk a lot.
Right.
But in this scene, because he's not getting what he needs from this woman, from his mom, is that he keeps talking to try to prove, no, I love this man. Yeah. Like, this is really, I'm not trying to get anything out of you. I'm not, negative. I'm not coming after him. I'm not this is my brother and I want to see him again. Yeah. And so all of that happening against the anger that she obviously feels, when he finds out that this last connection to life on some level is dead, it is absolutely crushing.
Yeah. And right off the bat, and we see him change because, as we said, the first time we see him, he's got this kind of joy, smile on his face. We don't know what to make of him. He seems like a good protagonist for our story. And then we see him suffer the death of someone that he cared about so deeply, and we see him process that. And we cut to a new music cue here, which is great, with the beat of these army drums now taking over with the other instruments. And we see a montage of Rambo walking down the highway to Hope, Washington. It says Holiday Town or something like that on the sign. And we cut to a sheriff's station where Sheriff Will Teasel, a.k.a. Brian Dennehy, comes out.
Morning, Amy. How you doing, girls?
Great, thanks.
Ted Kotcheff does a great job here as the director, introducing both Rambo and Will Teasel. If you look at the way Rambo comes into frame from a distance, and he comes into our frame and we see him so proud atop this mountain with a smile on his face, Will Teasel comes out and he shoots him from an even lower angle to make it look like he's this king astride his kingdom. And we see him surveying that kingdom as our first introduction. He has a smirk on his face, and then he belches and taps his belly. So we see this feeling that this is a guy who's very soft and comfortable and just kind of a guy who's very much in control of his world. He says hi to a few of the townsfolk there, even asks if one of them is taking a bath this week. This is a running gag throughout the movie that I discovered watching at this time. Will is a stickler for baths and showers, ladies and gentlemen. Cleanliness is a big thing to Will in this movie, as we discover.
So two things. One is, I think it's interesting, the last Brian Dennehy movie, I think maybe the only other Brian Dennehy we've done, he was the sheriff of Silverado. And he was having a great time there too. He likes being sheriff. And I think this is an important question, which is Sheriff Teasel a good sheriff from the perspective of the town?
I don't think we can answer that question, because we never hear from anybody in that town how much of a good sheriff Will Teasel is. Will may see him. Little Bill thought he was a good sheriff for that town.
Sure.
Is Will Teasel a good sheriff for this town? I don't know. He thinks he is.
He definitely thinks he is.
Right. But I mean, we have to question as we go along through the movie. I think this is a good question to answer at the end of our discussion of the entire film, considering some of the decisions Will Teasel makes in this movie and some of the people he's hired to be a part of his sheriff's office in this movie.
Well, that's a really good point. My feeling about it, just from this opening, because I think those people that are saying good morning to him are happy to see him and happy to say good morning. I think he is popular in the town. And I also think, but this is, again, this is what's really subversive about this movie. Is that moving along the vagrants, keeping the riffraff out of the town. The town might be happy because of that.
Right.
And what he is doing is terrible and wrong.
To the human condition.
To the human condition.
Yeah. So he gets in his sheriff's car, as I said. He comes upon John Rambo and asks him if surveys him and then asks him if he's visiting someone, which is essentially Are you from around these parts? I haven't seen you before. Or as we've seen recently, people going, wait, do you live here or not? We've seen those videos. And that's so essentially the same kind of connotation here. Rambo doesn't answer. He's still processing the death of Delmore Berry, but he exhales as he looks around as if to say he's dealt with this kind of nonsense before from people in authority.
You know, wearing that flag on that jacket, looking the way you do, you're asking for trouble around here, friend. Headed north or south?
North.
Now jump in. I'll make sure you head in the right direction, huh?
Great subtext here going on between these two guys. Teasel doing all the talking, Rambo doing barely any talking, but there's a communication going on between these two guys. They're not saying the subtext, but it is there for you to grasp. After a little bit, Rambo looks around, slowly accepts the ride, and gets in the car. When we get in the car, Teasel asks where he's headed again.
Portland. Portland is south. You said you were headed north.
You got someplace I can eat around here?
Teasel, not too subtly, says there's a diner 30 miles up the road, so you're someone else's problem.
Is there any law against me getting something here?
Yeah, me.
Why are you pushing me?
Teasel snaps back at him that he asks the questions in this town, not Rambo, and that town doesn't want guys like him in the town. Drifters attract other drifters, and then Teasel tries to soften it by saying to Rambo,
Besides, you wouldn't like it here. It's a quiet little town. In fact, you might say it's boring. But that's the way we like it.
We cut to Teasel driving him out past a bridge to a highway. He points Rambo in the direction of Portland. He tells him that if he cut his hair and took a bath, here we go again, he wouldn't get hassled so much. Then Teasel flips a bitch and sarcastically wishes Rambo a nice day. So, Steve, we're at the end of this interaction, we think, between Teasel and Rambo. But this interaction has spoken so much in 1982 about how Vietnam veterans were being treated in a number of towns and how much they were not empathetic and sympathetic to the plight, the PTSD, the emotional, mental health struggles that a lot of Vietnam veterans were going through coming back from Vietnam. And you see a person in authority who would normally, nowadays, thank a military person for their service, roll out the red carpet for a veteran and help them get some food. At the time in 1982, that was not happening to a lot of Vietnam veterans. They were being restricted from jobs. When they came home, the GI Bill did not exist for them. The benefits were taken away instead of given to them. They were called baby killers, spat upon. Sometimes bags of feces were thrown at them. And some of that's been overstated, but it did occur to some people. And even some people couldn't get jobs who had come out of college after they'd come back from Vietnam because they were veterans of a war that was very unpopular. They were hated by the left for being, quote unquote, baby killers because of the My Lai massacre, and they were hated by the right because they lost the war. So it's an interesting place for veterans to be at this time. And this interaction with Teasel, I think, speaks volumes in this opening section of the movie. What did you think about this interaction here as we finish off at the bridge?
Just on the politics of all this, the idea of blaming the soldiers who were largely drafted for what things that happened in Vietnam. I wouldn't have supported Vietnam. I didn't support our wars in Iraq, and Afghanistan is very complicated for me, but that has nothing to do with the brave and incredibly hardworking and responsible veterans that served in those wars. My feelings about the politics are unrelated. And that is something that the 60s and 70s really messed up.
Yes.
As far as this scene is concerned, the first thing I will point out, again, a critical difference with the book. Mm-hmm. In the book, Rambo is not wearing an army jacket. Rambo looks like a hippie. And the book, the city is also not in Washington. It is in Kentucky. And, and obviously these are cliches, but the hard-ass sheriff in Kentucky who sees a hippie is very different from the sheriff in Washington who sees a veteran.
Right.
Because part of it is that the sheriff in Kentucky in the book is a Korean War veteran and winner of I think it's the Distinguished Service Cross or something. Not quite the Congressional Medal of Honor, but a seriously decorated soldier too. And so he doesn't like hippies and doesn't know this guy is a veteran.
Right.
That is a critical difference.
Yeah.
I think this scene is so powerful, and there are two things that make it powerful for me. The first is John Rambo's silence.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you had Kirk Douglas trying to give himself a whole bunch of lines. My guess is Sylvester Stallone took away most of his own lines.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes us feel for the guy, is that he's not speaking. And that then we put ourselves in him and feel, what would it feel like for me to be treated by a sheriff? And the other thing that makes the scene so good is Teasel's, played perfectly by Dennehy, his 100% complete conviction that he is doing the absolute right thing.
Right. And that this isn't the first time he's done it.
Oh, God, no. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I will say this, Ted Kutcheff's direction, I think, works really well here. Not a well-respected or revered director, Ted Kutcheff, but certainly in this film, I think he does a wonderful job for what he's trying to do. The close-ups in the car between Teasel and Rambo, you see the looks on both of their faces. They turn into the camera so that you're feeling everything that's going on between these two guys. They probably have like 3-foot distance between each other, but it feels like they're on top of each other. Claustrophobia only adds to the tension going on between these two guys in this scene. It's so well shot. And I love that it's raining. I love you have that vibe of that. So there's a sense of sadness or depression or just like malaise here that you see with the rain. And I think that's so important as well. All right. So Rambo looks in the direction of Portland after Teasel is driven away, then adjusts his collar, looks back in the direction of the town, and defiantly starts walking back across the bridge as Goldsmith's score takes on a bit of a menacing sound here, foreshadowing that this is that Teasel was the first step in the breaking of this human contract between Rambo and Teasel. Rambo turning around and walking back into the town in defiance of Teasel is the next step that launches everything. Both men had a chance to do something different and better, to be the bigger men, and both men don't take that opportunity for their own reasons.
I think this is a perfect filmic moment. I just looked, it's like 8 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
Rambo has basically not spoken since he left the Del Mar's place.
Right.
And that moment of turning and going back into town is, we get it. I get everything that's supposed to be happening here.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. And as you said, the music is fantastic. I had totally forgotten this is Jerry Goldsmith's score.
Yeah.
And it is really, really good.
Yeah, I remember this is one of the first score cassettes that I ever bought. And I just would listen to it over and over again because I liked the cues here. Teasel sees Rambo out of his rearview mirror. He's not happy, turns his car around to stop Rambo verbally, asks him where he's going, where he thinks he's going, and then he blocks him with his car, gets out of his car. He tries to grab Rambo. Rambo knocks his hand away. Teasel immediately puts him under arrest, puts his hand on his gun.
Now, you're going to put your hands on that car. How you do it, you decide right now.
He kicks Rambo's legs open and says, you try to be nice to some people, and then searches him and pulls what is the famous Rambo knife, the first appearance of the Rambo knife, out of his back pocket. And this is important. We're going to get into why the knife is important later on in our discussion here. Teasel asks him what he's doing with a knife like that.
Hunting.
Don't be a wise guy. What do you hunt with a knife?
Maybe.
And then we cut to Teasel bringing Rambo into the station, and he walks him right up to Art Galt, played by Jack Starrett. Now, some of you may not remember this because after you see this movie, this is such a phenomenal asshole. But Jack Starrett was the town drunk in Blazing Saddles. So a completely
that's funny.
Yeah, a completely different portrayal than what you would expect from him in this movie. We're going to get to more of Art Galt as we go along as well. They book Rambo for vagrancy, resisting arrest, and concealing a weapon.
He says he uses it for hunting.
Hunting? What do you hunt? Elephants?
I'll just see if you can clean him up a little bit. All right, I'll meet you outside. Smells like an animal.
Again, another shower. What's his obsession with baths and showers? Art tries out the knife by cutting some paper smoothly, and then we see Rambo casing the place. If you notice watch this scene again, Rambo is casing the place. Where are the weapons? Where are the exits? That's what a good military person does whenever they're in a situation where they might be captured or might be needing to get out. He notices all of this. Art hands him off to Mitch, played by a young David Caruso. This was Caruso's second feature film that he was in this year, and the second one that was connected to the military. He was also in An Officer and a Gentleman that year.
Oh.
So interesting stuff. They take Rambo to Deputy Ward, who is played by great character actor Chris Mulkey, who some of you may remember from a number of things, but any day now, he's a series regular on that old show from the 90s, but still working. Credits in 2023, so clearly a very damn good actor. And this was one of the 3 films that he was in this year. So Mitch takes the handcuffs off Rambo, and Galt asks for his name. Rambo notices the bars on the window, and this is the first time, Steve, that we have a PTSD flashback to him being tortured by the North Vietnamese. We see him down in some pit, and feces, buckets of feces, are poured on top of him as he sits in that prison cell below. Galt asks for his name again while Rambo's lost in the flashback. When Rambo doesn't respond, Galt says,
Hey, if you're looking for trouble, you came to the right place, buddy.
feeling himself because he's got a badge on his shirt. When Mitch reaches for his dog tags to get his name, Rambo grabs Mitch's wrist, which causes Galt to rise up with the billy club in motion and threatens to break Rambo's face in. Mitch says he means it. Galt says, yeah, I do. Then Rambo allows Mitch to pull the dog tags off him, hands it to Galt, and Galt derisively laughs and says,
What do you know about that? Old Harry here's a soldier. Rambo. John Jay?
now this is different from the book, Steve, as we mentioned earlier. He is not called John Jay Rambo in the book. He is just called Rambo. They came up with John Jay here in the movie. Sylvester Stallone came up with that name to give him a kind of everyman feeling, everyman kind of name there for this. What do you think about that?
And also in the book, we don't even find out he's a soldier until much, much farther along. I think John Rambo is just a great name. Because it combines this somewhat exotic name of Rambo with the most American name we could possibly have as John.
Right.
I mean, I don't know anyone else who might have chosen a very American name like John. But it certainly makes an important statement.
Well, let's stop here because we've talked about it a lot. We haven't gotten to the fingerprints and that, but let's stop here and talk about this. Teasel brings him in. He immediately hands him off to Galt, who we find out later is his most sadistic deputy, Steve. Hands him off to Galt, tells Galt to shower him down, get him clean. They walk him down there. They're about to set him up for all kinds of things. But we see Galt has a kind of, this is an interesting introduction of this character. He has a hatred for this guy almost immediately. He has a distaste for this guy almost immediately. And it's interesting to hear that kind of Southern accent from someone in Washington. So what are your thoughts? Was this maybe a way of honoring the book by having someone having a Kentucky accent or a Southern accent in a way? What do you think about this introduction of Art Galt into the movie?
Well, first of all, if you look at Washington and Oregon and parts of California, people think of like the West Coast is like, this is liberal hippie land.
Yeah.
But no, you're out in the woods in Washington. There's a lot of other stuff going on. That's the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say, no disrespect. I love those areas of the country. They're beautiful. There's amazing things there, but there's some other stuff too. The other thing I would say is I think Galt is, you know how sometimes you might have an associate who you have a good relationship with, but deep down, maybe they're not always the best of people, Mm-hmm. I think Teasel has turned a blind eye on Galt a lot. And I also think Teasel has not so secretly gone, I have a feeling I don't want to know what Galt's going to do, but I know what Galt's going to do. He's going to treat a guy like Rambo the way that I don't think Teasel would ever treat him this way that Galt does. But I don't think Galt has as much of a problem with it as he might show. You know what I mean?
Right.
He doesn't want Galt. He hopes Galt won't go too far, but he knows that sometimes Galt might go too far.
Exactly. Which is why, as we answer this question at the end of the movie, I think this is the first indication that Teasel is actually a not a good sheriff for that town and is someone who uses his power to abuse situations and conveniently creates narratives in order to get himself out of trouble for his decisions. That's what I think about Teasel.
I want to go back to the PTSD thing.
Yes, please.
So first of all, in the book, again, because you're in Rambo's thoughts, you see the whole story of what happened to him, how he got captured, how they treated him in detail. And this is why having one shot or two shots that happen real quick on the screen are so much more powerful than, you say a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is an example, because I don't need to know everything. I just had to see that. And this is one of the great revelations of this film is that you see that person, because we've all walked by that person on the street who is talking to themselves, who maybe, like Teasel says, does smell, like is kind of looks gross. And you go, oh man, what's wrong with that person? And we have an emotional reaction to seeing that person.
Right.
And we don't know what that person has in their head. And we don't know what they've experienced. We don't know that person might very well be a hero. I had a guy 2 doors down. We called him the dog man because he walked about 8 or 9 dogs every night at 1 a.m. And he was an older guy. And I really didn't talk to him for the first couple of years that I lived here. Yeah. And what I finally found out was that he was a veteran and that he was taking care of his sister and that he was the sweetest, most loving guy in the world. But he also had some issues, but from the first perspective I had when I met him or saw him on the street was like, oh, there's the crazy dog man, and this is the thing. And so those quick shots of him and what he sees is so critical to our sympathy for him in the movie. And I think First Blood is a transformative moment in our culture of thinking about veterans.
This is the beginning. Coming Home, I think, kind of opened that door, but this is the beginning of the changing, of showing that the attitude towards Vietnam veterans was the wrong attitude that a lot of people had. Yes, we'd had Apocalypse Now, we'd had Deer Hunter, but showing a PTSD flashback like this, showing how it affects, this is a rarity. And 1982, and the situation also in 1982, Steve, we're seeing the police as villains here in a movie like this. We're just about to get, we're 2 years into Reagan in 1980, right? So this idea of police authority is being like lauded in the 1980s. But here's a film that comes out and shows a guy, Rambo, who is Sylvester Stallone, is a conservative, is a Republican. But here he is in this movie, as being the subject to police brutality. There's no other way to say it. The beginnings of police brutality, certainly with the way Galt, he's about to experience rather police brutality, certainly at the hands of Galt, but certainly there's emotional brutality from Teasel's side in the car. Not all he wanted was something to eat. Why was that such a problem? And it's Teasel who's thinking he has the power to push someone like that out of his town. So there's this idea of these fiefdoms and what you do with this power that shows who you are. I want to read something here. This is very interesting. I discovered in the research for this, and this gives me a little background on Galt. There is a backstory to Deputy Arthur Galt. Now, is Galt in the book?
Yeah, but he isn't this character. I think there is a character named Galt, but I don't think he's like this.
Well, apparently there is a backstory for Galt that was meticulously constructed. He was born in February 18th of 1933 in Hope, Washington. He enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in 1957 as a motor pool sergeant. He was honorably discharged from the Marines in 1957 as well, quickly afterwards, and then went and managed Ray's car lot in Hope and attempted to run his own restaurant, Sasquatch Burger, but it failed. Galt was arrested twice for drunken disorderly conduct, once in 1962, once in 1967. He was arrested a third time for assault and battery in 1969, but the charges were dismissed after being arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol, for which he received a suspended sentence. Galt joins, quote, the Order, a radical paramilitary group, and in 1970, he begins working for the Leggett County Sheriff's Department in Hope as a sheriff's deputy with his friend, Sheriff Will Teasel, and then is promoted to deputy sergeant after his friend becomes sheriff. So this is such an interesting backstory because nowadays, Steve, we're having this conversation about how many white supremacists, white nationalists, how many people part of these gang organizations are serving in the police department, in the sheriff's department. Certainly that's a big deal in LA. We've seen that. So having this backstory for this guy is so interesting. Seeing this guy in 1982 being played in this manner, I think it's an eye-opening thing akin to what happened in the early 90s when West Coast rappers started to rap about police brutality, and a lot of people's eyes were open to what was going on here in the Black community from the police towards the Black community. So I think there's a connective tissue between these two things.
Okay, this is crazy because I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
And the thing is you know how I was saying, and I was trying to be delicate about saying there's certain things in Washington and Oregon where maybe politically they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
Well, the Order is a real group.
Yes.
That's not a made up group.
Yeah.
That is a white supremacist organization in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And they are the ones responsible for the assassination of Alan Berg, the radio host, which is where the movie Talk Radio comes from.
Oh, right.
That is what
yeah.
Yes. And not only that, but I acted in a play in college about the Order called God's Country.
Wow.
Yeah, that was all about that assassination.
Wow.
Yeah. So no, so that's really interesting, particularly putting Teasel in that.
Yeah.
And the thing too is that Galt is a completely different kind of asshole from Teasel.
Right. Yes.
Galt is a straight up like, you are a brutal, horrible, power,
he's sadistic.
Drunk guy. He's sadistic. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and we should say too, like David Caruso acts as a really great counter.
Yes, I've got that in the notes as well. Mitch is the guy who is like aware. He's the guy that's in the Stockholm Syndrome situation. He has seen Galt do this to a number of other people, and he does his best. He's like the guy in prison who's trying to tell you how to act so you don't get beat up worse by the people who are locking you up.
Just do what he wants. It's going to be easier.
Exactly. It's basically what Mitch serves as throughout the movie until he crosses that one line with Teasel after Galt dies. But yeah, it's a great point you bring up about Mitch, Stephen. We should definitely hit on those. I have it in my notes when those moments happen. All right, let's get back into this thing. When Rambo doesn't respond to Galt after he asks him about his name, Galt puts his billy club to Rambo's neck and says threateningly,
"You're going to talk to me. I promise you're going to talk to me, soldier."
If there's anything someone in authority hates is when you ignore them or don't respond to them because they take it as an attack on their authority. And I have this, my next note. It's funny you jumped the gun here, Steve. Mitch does little movements that make you feel like he's seen this bullshit from Galt before and he's trying to stop Rambo from falling for it. Then we cut to Ward trying to fingerprint him, but Rambo won't let him. Galt is getting pissed, slams his billy club onto the table in front of Rambo.
Down, God damn it!
Art, what the hell is going on down here?
Oh, nothing I can't handle.
The thing about him, the way that Rambo is resisting, is what I wonder when I was watching it is I wonder if this style of I am not going to participate. I'm going to make everything that you're trying to have me do harder.
Yeah.
If that's what he developed in the POW camp. You know what I mean? Like I can't fight back because I don't have the power, but I can make it hard for them at every single step of anything they want to do with me.
Well, I think there's connective stuff here too, Steve, because having the PTSD, I understand that it's flashbacks, but the flashbacks are being triggered because the behavior is exactly like the behavior or is connected or similar to the behavior he suffered at the hands of the North Vietnamese. People who are in charge of a situation abusing someone who is under their who's under arrest by them or put in a prison by them. They're trying to use their authority to embarrass and shame him. So naturally, he starts to have these flashbacks because the feelings are coming back that are similar to the things he experienced in that North Vietnamese POW camp, right?
Well, absolutely. Well, and again, I think I mentioned this before. There was recently a series on the podcast Embedded that was dealing with a friendly fire incident in Iraq, and they would talk to a lot of soldiers with PTSD. And the thing that they say that I think this film really captures is it could be anything. It could be a sound. It could be an image. It could be a smell. And suddenly that adrenaline hits because it's connected to this traumatic experience they had, and they're back in that place. And that's exactly what we see happening to John Rambo in this scene is a little image, the bars on the window, the way he gets grabbed is throwing him back into this moment of trauma.
Right.
And that is, and of course, Galt and all these guys, they can't see what's happening on the inside, which again is why the book is not as good, because in the book it explains in detail everything he's going through and thinking.
Now listen, hard-ass. As things stand right now, you're facing the ass end of a 90-day incarceration plus a $250 fine, which you don't look to me like you can pay. At 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you're going up in front of that judge. Now we're going to make you a little bit more presentable for your courtroom appearance.
All right, we cut to Rambo in his cell. He takes his shirt off. And Mitch freaks out seeing all the scars on the front and the back of his body. This is, I think, where Mitch starts to realize that they're dealing with someone who is maybe a little bit out of their abilities to deal with. Galt has Rambo turn around with his back to him, and then Galt sucker hits him in the lower back with his billy club. Let me tell you, as someone who is suffering lower back injuries right now, I felt this more than I've ever felt it when I watched it in the movie. Rambo goes down. You can clearly tell Mitch doesn't like it.
Galt, what the fuck was that?
Well, the man said clean him up.
Then Galt kicks Rambo while he's down.
Clean him up.
And then we cut to Rambo being sprayed down by a fire hose. Galt looks on laughing. And to me, I wrote this in my notes here, I can't help but get the illusion to a fire hose being turned on supposed troublemakers by the police. Of course, we saw that in the civil rights movement and other places, Steve.
Well, and I don't know, I think it's called dominance theory with the policing, which is I have to always present that I'm in the dominant position and I have to take away the power of the people. Otherwise, they're going to stand up to me and I could be the subject of violence if I don't establish my power.
Right.
And that is clearly what Galt's trying to do, because that's the only way he can see how to do things.
Yeah.
If I can't dominate this guy, then I can't control him. And if he won't be dominated, I have to continually escalate.
Yeah.
And the thing is all you had to do was be nice to John Rambo, and none of this happens.
Just let him eat at the diner.
Yeah.
And he moves on.
Have a meal, or maybe go like, look, why don't I get you a place to stay and somewhere where you can get a shower, back to the shower thing, but as a gift, as, hey, I care about veterans. Right. And then you get everything that you want, and then you don't have to have what happens happen.
We don't have a movie if that happens.
Well, of course.
But also but it's reflecting the prevailing attitude towards Vietnam veterans at the time. And I think that's what's so fantastic about this film. It is absolutely showing you that and making it clear what's going on here. They're not overtly doing it, but you're very aware of how this is happening. And I think this film was shining a light on the face of some people, or turning a mirror on some people to make them take a look at their treatment of Vietnam veterans through Teasel, through Galt as well. All right, Mitch doesn't like that they're shooting the spray hose on Rambo. He looks down, then walks away. Then we cut to Ward coming in with the razor and the shaving cream, and here we go. Rambo starts to have a flashback, and Galt grabs him around, another PTSD flashback, and Galt grabs him around the neck with his billy club and drags him into the showers. And and Rambo has this flashback of him being strung up on a cross here. By the way, Sylvester Stallone, phenomenal shape in this movie. Galt tells Ward to shave him dry because Rambo is tough, so he doesn't need the shaving cream. And as the razor comes close to Rambo's neck, he absolutely flips out because he goes deep into that PTSD vision, kicks the shit out of all of these people, including Galt, then runs up the stairs, kicks the shit out of those deputies, tosses them through windows, then double kicks Teasel as he's coming around the corner with his gun. Teasel shoots the gun off to somebody. Thank God nobody got killed there. Then the last deputy, Lester, who is coming through the front door, Rambo takes him out with a sliding kick and then elbows him in the face. By the way, Stallone actually elbowed this guy in the face. That's why he has a Band-Aid through the entire movie, because of what Stallone did to him. Stallone actually, Rambo runs out the front door after grabbing his knife, and then that awesome score kicks in, this escape score kicks in. He corrals a motorcycle from a guy who apparently fell 3 feet and just got knocked out and takes off. Galt, who is clearly out of his mother effing mind, runs out of the sheriff's station with a rifle, wants to do his best version of Bert the cop shooting at George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. But Teasel knocks the rifle up, so he shoots in the air. Again, another stray bullet.
There's people down there. All right, get help. I'll go after them.
So, Steve, what an ending to this. And we were building through this, the little moments of defiance, Galt getting more and more upset, Teasel coming in to see what's going on, and the PTSD flashbacks. And finally, Galt goes one step too far, and then the knife triggers the PTSD, and boom, explosion central. And Rambo shows you how he can take out all these people very, very quickly and get himself out of that situation. One of the many examples we'll see through the movie, Steve, that he opts to not kill these people. He opts to injure them so he can get out of the situation.
And in the book, he does kill one of them. He gets a straight razor and slits someone's belly open, and the description of all their guts coming out.
Jesus.
Well, and this is the thing too about the book, is that he likes killing people. There's part of him that likes that, and he's thinking about that, and he's having this debate of, should I just kill them all kind of thing? Right. And that is very different from the experience of watching this movie. I also think, by the way, I suspect that I rented Terminator before I rented First Blood.
The first Terminator.
The first Terminator.
Okay.
Because I've always associated this with Arnold's rampage in the police station in Terminator.
Interesting.
Because they're both unstoppable people.
Yes.
Where, I mean, Terminator's obviously even more unstoppable than Rambo, but where the police just have no idea what they've gotten themselves into.
Yeah.
I think it's a great sequence. By the way, you mentioned his physique. One of the things I think's amazing about Stallone is that the Rambo physique this is 82.
Yeah.
Is different from Rocky IV's physique. They are like he is able to not only put himself into unbelievable shape, but put himself into different shape. One more thing about the book, by the way, when he runs out of that police station, he is bare ass naked. When he's completely naked. I'm glad they made that choice. But again, I just want to highlight the choice of him choosing not to kill people is critical to this film.
I agree. And he takes an extra measure of beating on Galt. He does give Galt more hits than he gives any of the other deputies. And I think that's a little bit of him pushing back at that kind of authority that Galt is abusing. And nothing says you're insane than running out with a high-powered rifle and shooting it into the streets where citizens are still standing around. So the difference between Teasel and Galt, as you mentioned earlier, is Teasel tries to stop Galt from doing that, whereas Galt would have absolutely kept shooting until he probably injured one of the citizens there, because fuck it, he's going to get Rambo some way or another. Now we get a chase scene with Teasel and his cruiser going after Rambo on his motorcycle. This is all happening in the rain, by the way, at insane speeds for these stuntmen. And here's a story for you. The stunt person sitting in for Will Teasel, when they go do that stunt jumping over the train tracks, the ramp ejects the car too high. And by the time that stuntman lands, the shock absorbers are completely shattered and he breaks his back. Jesus. The stuntman does, which is a horrible accident that happens to him here. So these are the things, stunt people, we talk about writers and actors, but stunt people as well, their commitment, especially back in the not too safe 80s days, it's incredible that there wasn't more deaths and injuries to these stunt people with some of the stunts that they were pulling in these movies. They head all the way out of town into some forest areas, and Teasel is just wrecking his cruiser, trying to catch Rambo before Rambo finally gets away through some underbrush initially. Then Will calls in their location and keeps going after Rambo as Rambo takes off on his bike again. Teasel crashes through some fence, catches up to Rambo miraculously, and then finally, after more of the chase, Teasel careens off the side of the road, ends up upside down. Rambo stops to make sure he's okay, then takes off, loses the cycle as he tries to go high up the hill with the motorcycle, takes off on foot. Teasel comes after him with his gun drawn, but loses him, and then yells some empty threats at Rambo about him being finished and that this is as far as he's going to go. So, Steve, what an interesting chase scene to happen in the middle of the movie. And apparently this chase scene was much longer because the original cut of the film, and I'll talk about that at the end with our end notes, the original cut of the film was 3 to 3.5 hours long.
Jesus.
And this chase scene was apparently 40 minutes of the movie.
What?
40 minutes of the movie.
Well, I mean, as we said many times, first cuts are always long and they're always bad.
Yes.
I like this chase scene. I think it's a good chase scene. My guess is it's 5 minutes or 6 or 7 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
Like
Not that long.
I don't think it sustains for 40 minutes. Well, but I also think, like, you know, I am not the biggest one must rigidly adhere to correct screenwriting structure. But in this case, this is a good example of how correct screenwriting structure works, which is there's something called the inciting incident, which is the thing that gets the ball rolling. And it usually happens in the first 10 minutes of the film. This movie's inciting incident is when John Rambo turns around and decides to walk back into town. The movie doesn't happen when he doesn't make that choice. The end of Act 1, which usually happens before the first third of the movie, so we're talking 25 minutes in or so, or 30 minutes in for an hour and a half movie, is when we know what the movie is going to be. Now the movie is what it's going to be. And for this, it is Rambo heading into the mountains, and the cops are going to have to go try to get him. That is what the movie is going to be. This is perfect, classic screenwriting structure.
That's a great point, Steve. I never thought of it that way. They are essentially previewing what is going to happen for the rest of the movie, which is Rambo escaping Teasel and Teasel growing more and more desperate to catch him and taking more and more risks to catch Rambo, and Rambo successfully eluding him consistently throughout the movie. That's a great point. All right, Rambo scrambles up the hill in the forest. He's cold, finds some thread, and then finds some burlap that he cuts into a jacket. The other sheriffs and deputies show up here. Teasel tells Mitch to get Orville with the Dobermans to come track down Rambo because they can smell better in the rain. I never knew that. He tells Lester to get Galt to get the helicopter from a lumberjack camp, and if they resist, arrest them for obstruction of justice. And then he says to himself, we'll get him. No problem. We'll get him. And I don't think he believes it himself, Steve. Do you think he believes it when he says that?
I think he still does believe it to some degree, because I think Teasel's never been challenged. Do you know what I mean?
Not in this way. Right.
Yeah. I think he's been the big dog in the town and nobody fucks with him. And and honestly, Rambo, I think the problem with the later movies is that he becomes too much of a superhero, but the reality is he is kind of a superhero. And I don't think there's any way that Teasel could suspect just how powerful and dangerous this guy is.
Yeah.
But you know who does suspect?
Mitch.
Fucking Mitch.
Look, Mitch is the hero of the movie. If Mitch did listen to Mitch, none of this would have happened. Absolutely good point. We cut to Rambo, who's built himself that burlap jacket, as I said. Then we cut to Orville showing up with his dogs, and Orville looks like you'd expect him to look with dogs like that. Then we see the deputies from the station coming up, and they're all joking around, making small talk. Like this is no big deal, which lets you know they don't know yet what they're dealing with. So they're just making these jokes. They think this guy's a drifter who's just running off. Yeah, maybe served in the military at some point, maybe a Vietnam veteran, but seems like a drifter. We cut to Rambo. He is using the compass on his knife to figure out where he is. Then we cut back to the deputies talking about Rambo going to the peak of the mountain. And they think he's stupid for going to the peak of the mountain. So they think they're smarter than he is. And as they're walking up, Mitch tells Balford, who is played by future Miami Vice actor Michael Talbot.
There were 3 of us on him in the cell block down there. He went through us like we weren't even there.
I want to say this to you. There was a Navy SEAL who coordinated the fight choreography on the set. Caruso didn't think it was believable that Rambo could take care of 3 or 4 people. So the Navy SEAL had them attack him with Caruso, and he took 3 of them out, no problem. So just showing that kind of a situation here, which I really enjoy. Anyway, the first seeds of doubt here are from Mitch. Mitch is the one who's like nervous about what's going on here. We cut to Rambo, who comes upon a massive cliff as the dogs are getting closer. Rambo tries to calm down, and just then we see a helicopter come over the trees. Steve, it's Galt. Teasel tells Galt that Rambo is headed for the gorge. Rambo is barely hanging on the side here when Galt shows up in the helicopter. Galt spots him, hangs out the window with his rifle, shoots at him, keeps missing him because the helicopter pilot says they're in a thermal draft and can't keep it steady. Galt, in this sadistic, quiet voice, says,
If you don't fly this thing right, I swear to God I'll kill you.
Then Teasel is shocked by the gunshots, which I wrote, really? How well does he know his old friend that he's surprised that Galt is shooting at this guy? Teasel tries to get him on the radio, but Galt ignores him. Galt lines up one final shot. Rambo jumps in slow motion, falls into the tree. Galt gets the helicopter closer, takes shots at him, and then Rambo throws a rock, hits the pilot's window. Galt falls out to his death. One note on this before we talk about it. Stallone actually did the last third of the stunt and did, in fact, break his rib. So he was playing real pain there when he lands on the ground. So, Steve, what are your thoughts on this and the demise of, I'm not going to say poor Galt, but the demise of Galt?
So, first of all, when Teasel is hearing the rifle fire, and you say, and I agree, of like, come on, you didn't really know your friend. But I'm not going to say in Teasel's defense, because that's not how I feel. But I will say, you and I totally have friends, I won't mention any names, where they do a thing, and you're like, oh, fuck. They're going to do that thing. I know they're going to.
Galt does. We don't have any friends who would do what Galt does.
No, of course not. But there's definitely like, of course, because we don't hang out with Galt.
Yeah,
like
Galt,
he's not one of our dudes. But if we did hang out with Galt, we would totally have the moments of, oh fuck, he's going to do that thing. Yeah. It is interesting because in the book, Rambo has gotten a rifle, which he gets from some guys who are running a still, and he kills the guys in the helicopter.
Wow.
So it isn't what happens here. I also think, by the way, that jump off the cliff stunt, that's where, like, come on. I don't buy that Rambo survives that one. It's totally fucking nuts. It is interesting that Stallone got hurt doing it.
Yeah.
But I do think that Galt's death does 2 things. One is it's really satisfying.
Yes.
Because fuck Galt.
Right.
And 2 is, you know that this is only going to make things worse for Rambo.
Yes.
You know, and that's a good structure of a movie.
I have a question I put in here.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, you and I at times differ on our desire to see the death of villains in a film.
Yes.
When Galt dies, do you feel satisfied? Or
No,
do you
it's
feel like, okay, he got his just desserts? Or do you actually think it's a tragedy?
Oh, I don't think it's tragedy.
Okay.
No, it really is just as I describe. I fucking hate Galt. Galt is villainous. Teasel's obviously a villain too.
Yeah.
But Galt is villainous in a very villainous way. He is a horrible, horrible fucking person. And so I don't feel bad, but it's more the feeling I have for Rambo. It's just like, there's no way that Rambo, this doesn't make things worse for him, even though he's killed a guy who was trying to kill him.
And we should get back to the movie here. The helicopter pilot takes off, doesn't stick around or anything like that. As Rambo makes his way to Galt, he picks up Galt's lifeless body and stares at him for a few seconds. And I have another question. Steve, what do you think he's thinking here as he looks into the lifeless open eyes of a Deputy Sheriff Galt here on the rock? And the rock is bloody. So what do you think he's thinking as he looks into the eyes of Galt here?
This is what makes it so much better that it's a movie and not a book, because we get to guess. In a book, they tell you this is what he's thinking, which I think was, I'm glad I killed that guy.
Really?
Oh. Yeah, I think so. And whereas in this, it is because remember, he killed them with a rifle in the book.
Yes.
So he chose to kill them. In this, I feel that he is going, I didn't want to kill anybody. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want any of this. Like, how did I end up here? I don't want this,
Right.
That's what I feel. What do you feel?
I feel that he's looking at him and it's yet another death that he takes on to his ledger. And it's another death to feel guilty about. And it's another death to question his worth in the world, right? There's so much that he's got going on.
Yeah.
So he has this look, and it's not the first time, obviously, that he's seen death right in front of him, as we're going to find out as he breaks down in front of Troutman later on. But certainly looking into the eyes of this person, there's almost, not quite overt, but there's a hint of a sense of sadness or tragedy that it had to come to this, right? And it was an unintentional death. If Galt's not hanging out like some cowboy hanging out the side of it, this thing, taking these irresponsible shots, there's no way he dies. Rambo was just trying to get them off of him, which is why he threw the rock. By the way, doesn't throw the rock at Galt. He throws it at the window of the pilot so that the pilot would take off and not kill Galt, but get out of there and take Galt away from him. So even in that moment, he is trying to do, in my opinion, trying to do what's right so that Galt doesn't kill him and he doesn't hurt Galt. Rambo hears the dogs and takes Galt's coat off of him and his rifle and takes off. Teasel comes upon the ridge with the rest of the deputies and sees Galt's lifeless body in a pool of blood on the rocks, and he is absolutely distraught. As I said earlier, these guys apparently go back quite some way, so this is a real hard thing for Teasel to swallow. Rambo stitches up his arm from the cut he suffered falling into the trees. He walks out.
But by the way, great blood effect. As he's stitching up his arm, that is a great effect.
Yeah. It's not as cool as Rambo putting gunpowder inside of his body as he does in Rambo 3, but it's pretty cool.
There's one man dead. It's not my fault. I don't want any more hurt.
Freeze! Stand right where you are. Give yourself up.
But I didn't do anything.
Here he is again telling Teasel, I didn't do anything. Why do you want to arrest me? Why are you coming after me? Rambo starts to move backwards, and then Teasel opens fire on him, which causes the other deputies to shoot their weapons, with Ward being the most trigger happy. One of them grazes Rambo in the head, and he runs back behind the rocks. Teasel says they hit him, and they run down there. Teasel calls Lester and tells him to get the chopper back there. The pilot won't come back because there's a storm coming. Bullshit. He doesn't want to come back and get in trouble with Teasel. Then Lester drops a bomb in this moment.
Sure picked one hell of a guy to mess around with. This came over the teletype a few minutes ago. John Rambo is a Vietnam vet. He's a Green Beret, Congressional Medal of Honor. Guy's a war hero.
This is the first time that Teasel hesitates in dealing with Rambo, then ignores it and tells Lester to get that chopper. Mitch leads the protest of the other deputies with Teasel.
War hero. That's great. That's
Why don't you
just
shut your
great.
mouth? Now what the hell's the matter with you guys? He's one man. He's wounded.
And then Mitch crosses the line you can't cross and he condescendingly says to his superior officer,
Why don't you let the state police handle this?
and then Teasel loses it, slaps Mitch's hat off of his head, drags Mitch by his neck and face to in front of Galt's body, has him look at Galt.
Look at him, it's our Galt boy. He and I were friends when your mama was still wiping your nose. Now he's dead. He's dead because of that psycho out there. Now you listen, boy, and you listen to me good. I'm going to get that son of a bitch. And I'm going to pin that Congressional Medal of Honor to his liver.
What are your reactions here to Teasel finally coming face to face and understanding who's being confronted with in this film?
I think Teasel, he is not as much of an idiot as he is in the book. And he is not quite as prideful and foolish as he is in the book. Because in the book, he's just like, they're out there for like days in the storm at night
really?
trying to hunt Rambo. Yeah.
Wow.
Just doing stupid stuff. And by the way, one other thing, you'd mentioned the guy, Orville, the guy with the dogs.
Yes.
In the book, that is like a father figure that he's had a falling out with for
Teasel? It's a father
Yeah.
figure of Teasel's?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he dragged him out there, and then that guy gets killed. His father figure. And the guy is saying, hey, Teasel, why don't you call the state police? And you shouldn't be doing this. You're letting your pride get in the way. So Teasel is much, I think, dumber in the book than he is here. I also think it is such a, Mitch is right.
Yeah.
And that it's that, but I also think it's brilliant, even though Galt is a villain and Galt is an asshole, making Galt one of Teasel's friends.
Yeah.
He can't let that go because, and this actually, I'm really glad you asked this question because the way that Teasel is sheriff is that I have this status and nobody messes with my status. And that is why, again, I think there are people in that town who really like Teasel as sheriff. He does keep the riffraff out. That's what I think. I don't think, so now there's been a problem that Teasel hasn't dealt with, and his big enforcer has gotten killed. He cannot allow this to happen at this point. It's about pride. It's about status. It's about his sense of power in the town. All of that is true.
I say I would counter because I think they're all nice to him because they don't want to get in trouble with Teasel.
Totally possible.
Yeah,
totally.
Because they know he's a prick who uses his power, and they probably grew up with Teasel. They knew Teasel when he was in high school, when he was in college, when he was an athlete, a failed athlete eventually, came back to the town to become sheriff, and he just uses his size. And Dennehy's natural size has always served him well in movies as a villain. And so in this situation, you can see him being a guy who, like, if you cross him, he is going to remember it and even if you are right, he's still going to passive aggressively take shots at you. We know those people, Steve, that hate being wrong. And when you prove them wrong, they hate losing that status. So they're going to find a way to needle you until they feel like they've come back to the dominant position. So he's the kind of, he radiates that to me. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was thinking about the fact that this is 82. Yes. And after 82, there are all sorts of movies where I will call them you don't realize what you're dealing with. That Cook was a former Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
The president of the United States was a former Green Beret. John McClane is way more of a badass. You don't know what you're dealing with. And, and this is the first one of those that I can think of. But what's so interesting about it is tonally, it's so different because in all those other movies, it's the bad guys who don't know what they're dealing with.
Right.
Now, of course, I think Teasel and Galt obviously are the bad guys in this movie.
Well, they're antagonists, if nothing.
They're the antagonists, but they're also the law.
Yeah.
And so there's so much more emotion filling all of this, that realization. It isn't just, we're going to see someone kick ass, which is how you see with Steven Seagal in Under Siege. It is, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Because it's this collision that's happening between two sides that we don't want this fight to happen.
Right.
Just like John Rambo doesn't want the fight to happen.
Right.
Teasel doesn't want the fight to happen, but Teasel needs to win,
Now he needs to win, as you said, to save face. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We cut to Rambo cutting some wood into spikes, little foreshadowing for what's coming to one of the deputies. Then the deputy is talking about a storm approaching. Mitch and Ward get into it and get into a physical fight here about Rambo. And then Teasel breaks them up. Tells them to focus on who the real villain is here, which is Rambo, and they head deeper into the forest as the storm begins. They think they see Rambo over the trees, so Orville lets the dogs go, but it's a trick, and Rambo kills the dogs and shoots Orville with Galt's rifle.
something that almost never happens in movies ever, killing dogs.
Yeah.
You could kill 1,000 people in a movie, but you don't kill the fucking dog, and that happens in this movie.
Yeah, more dogs are killed in this movie of Rambo than humans. And that's a rarity. The deputies drop down after Rambo has shot Orville, and they just start firing away indiscriminately, wasting ammo. They realize now that he has a rifle and that what they thought was Rambo is a scarecrow. Orville thinks he's got the jump on Rambo, sends his last dog, and then we hear the yelps of him killing the final dog with his knife. Teasel tells Mitch to put the tourniquet on Orville and tells Orville to turn it every 15 minutes because Teasel ain't going to let a hurt citizen of his town, who he has sworn to protect, by the way, stop him from getting his revenge on Rambo. Teasel lays out a quick plan, and Mitch says, we ain't hunting him. He's hunting us. Again,
Mitch, come on.
Mitch is the truth teller of the movie. And now we get this great well, I mean, for me, it's a great sequence. Where one by one.
I agree.
You do? Okay, good.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Where one by one, Rambo gets the best of all these jittery deputies. He gets Mitch first, ironically, with a knife to the back of his leg, and Mitch is screaming for his life. Great work there by David Caruso. Then Rambo takes out Ward from behind and breaks his arm. Balfour sees Rambo in a flash of lightning and shoots at him, but he actually hits Ward with the bullets instead in his shoulder. And as Balfour runs in, he gets hit with the wooden spikes that we had just seen Rambo shaving down in a couple of seconds ago. Then Singleton is taken out from behind when Teasel is running over to help Balfour. And then Teasel goes to find Singleton and sees Singleton tied to a tree. And as Teasel approaches, Rambo jumps out of the underbrush with a knife to Teasel's throat. Teasel faintly drops his rifle, immediately goes full submissive and weak-kneed, scared for his life. Rambo tells him that he could have killed them all, including Teasel. And he says, in town, you're the law. Out here, it's me. Don't push it or I'll give you a war you won't believe. Let it go. Let it go. And then he leaves as Teasel crumples to the ground, crying and praying to God.
So,
Steve, what a sequence.
I think it's an amazing sequence. First of all, one of the choices I always have to make editing is, do I cut out my voice saying the line and put the other person in, or do I leave in my voice saying the line? And there is no question in my mind. I might play some of Stallone, but I'm playing you saying that line there because that was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I've wanted to say that line to a number of people in different situations. But anyway,
I could feel it. So I think the sequence is so good.
Yeah.
And one of the things, just a small note, but we talked about this before about how much fun it is to see intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this sequence is.
Yes.
Is that he has thought through each of these different things, and they're all different. And one of the things I find really interesting is they're spatially different. Mm-hmm. So the first one, Rambo is below, and then Rambo is above, and then Rambo is behind. Every position he's in is different. Every technique he uses to catch these guys is different. Yeah. He's thought through it all. It is really, and you are 100% convinced that he could have killed all of them.
Oh, yeah.
And he chose not to. In the book, of course, he does kill all of them.
Oh, wow.
He kills everybody, and he wounds Teasel in a way that he is near death. Wow. So it's that's very different. And I also want to tell a story.
Okay.
So there's a guy who was the producer on The Assistants. His name was Michael Dennis. Mm-hmm. Awesome guy. Michael Dennis was a former Marine, Force Recon, which is the serious shit. It's like being a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret or one of those guys. And here is a story that he told me from his training.
Okay.
So you told the story about David Caruso challenging the advisor that they had. Okay, check this story out. So they're out on training and they're supposed to be on alert, and they have people that are set up as guards, and they have people who are, you get 4 hours of sleep or 2 hours of sleep or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
And they said, we are going to send someone in who's really good, and your job is just not to get killed. They all go to sleep. Every single one of them wakes up the next day and they have magic marker across their throats because this guy snuck through the entire camp and killed every one of these highly trained forced recon Marines.
Jesus.
And didn't wake a single fucking person up.
Oh my God. See, that tells you. He's
terrifying.
Exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's the next day, and there's a whole operation now with the state police being involved. The deputies are being taken out on stretchers. The press is there, and more helicopters. Teasel is getting his wounds dressed when State Police Dave comes in, tells Teasel to go home and that Rambo is his problem now. And Will Teasel, who apparently loves authority, condescendingly screams at the state police, who have authority over the sheriffs, to not give him any nonsense about jurisdiction, and that there's a funny exchange between State Police Dave and the EMT there, who says, "I can leave if y'all going to have a fight here." He says, "No, stay there and keep doing what you're doing." We cut to a reporter doing his story about Rambo. We hear that the National Guard is there with the state police, and that no one is answering how Rambo was able to get a rifle. And I put in parentheses, yeah, because it would be embarrassing to them. And then the reporter lays out some bullshit about how the sheriff's police training saved them from Rambo, which of course was probably told to him by Teasel.
Did you have the thought when the reporter came out of Peter Benchley being the reporter in Jaws?
No, I did not, but that's a great reference.
It totally reminded me of that. And I love such a great piece of writing is the story that the reporter tells about what is going on.
Yes.
Because it is such a perfect government narrative of these hero cops, and there's this guy, and they had their incredible skills, and that's why they escaped, instead of the story of Rambo could have killed all of them at any time and chose to let them live after he had been physically abused and hassled by the cop, and the cop tried to kill him from the helicopter. All that stuff's gone.
Yeah.
And we get this narrative. So the public is out there thinking what the reporter told them.
Yes, absolutely. And again, this is yet another one of these moments in this film where there's some subversive stuff going on here towards the police, towards this idea of official narratives about loners and drifters doing these things, and how people who are in charge of the media can push narratives about certain people because they have the power to do so. And they lean on the media to push certain things. Now, I'm not trying to say the media as a blanket statement and all reporters think the same, but certainly there are police departments that have friendly media to them that they use to pump certain narratives out there. And we have to be more disseminating when we're getting reports or getting news reports about these kinds of things. And so certainly this is an example of that. This film is full of all kinds of subversive stuff going on here for 1982, by the way. It's incredible, but it's that 1970s attack, question your institution stuff carrying over here into the early 80s, Steve.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right. Oh, and I do want to say one thing. I didn't mention this earlier. In that sequence that we just talked about where he attacks all the deputies and gets the best of them, Ted Kotcheff's direction, again, is fantastic here, right? Seeing Rambo above Ward, as you said, going from below to above in all the different ways he attacks, seeing Rambo from above there, come down on him in that way, just the real specter of that. The lightning comes in at the right time, the speed at which everything happens, and then having him come out from the underbrush, like Jaws, you mentioned Peter Benchley, like Jaws in essence, coming out of the water to attack Teasel. It's really well done here from Ted and how he directs that sequence. It doesn't work without the way it's edited and the way it's directed so well. All right, Lester walks in and tells Teasel that Mitch said the guys were hard on Rambo, which prompts an angry response from State Police Dave, who says, "Assholes."
Doesn't make one goddamn bit of difference, Dave, and you know it. If one of my deputies gets out of line with a prisoner, then the prisoner comes to me with it. And if I find out it's like he says, I kicked the deputy's ass. Me. The law. That's the way it's got to be.
What a load of malarkey, in my opinion, Steve. Then he says, people start fucking with the law, then all hell breaks loose. Never mind, in my opinion, that he has told the state police to not take over the case, even though that is the law. So he's not wrong because all hell is about to break loose here because Teasel was fucking with the law here, Steve.
Well, and I would say, how am I going to say this?
So
at this point, everything that has happened because Teasel was an asshole.
Yes.
Yes. That his running Rambo through town when he didn't have to, and then arresting him, and then handing him to Galt is why all this is happening. And of course, everything that Galt did, it escalated everything.
Right.
At this point, that has nothing to do with the fact that at this point, Rambo does have to be brought in.
Yes.
That's, you know what I mean? Like you can't actually just let this guy go.
He's,
even though he's a victim in this situation, like you can't just go, oh yeah, this this thing happened and this one guy died and these whole other people of cops just got wounded and damaged and ripped through and all this stuff. And we're going to let him go. We can't, there's no way legally in this world we can do that at this point. You know what I mean?
Well, you say that, and then we've got Troutman coming to essentially push that narrative here in just a few minutes.
Never possessed God in heaven to make a man like Rambo.
And then in the back, behind Teasel, we hear the voice of Colonel Troutman saying,
God didn't make Rambo. I made him.
What a great introduction to a character. He is in silhouette there, standing at the mouth of the opening of the tent. The great Richard Crenna here as Colonel Troutman.
Look, we're a little busy this morning, Colonel. What can I do for you?
I've come to get my boy.
Your boy?
I recruited him. I trained him. I commanded him in Vietnam for 3 years. I'd say that makes him mine.
And then we have one of the best exchanges in the movie.
I didn't come here to rescue Rambo from you. I came here to rescue you from him.
Teasel, who must have amnesia at this point, I wrote down, scoffs at Teasel and mocks him by saying,
Well, we all appreciate your concern, Colonel. And we'll try to be extra careful.
Troutman then calls him out, saying he's amazed that any of his deputies survived. He said he's lucky to even be breathing.
You don't seem to want to accept the fact that you're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare. With a man who's the best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. In Vietnam, his job was to dispose of enemy personnel. To kill. Period.
Teasel is unsettled by this. Maybe he got his memory back. And then we cut to Teasel and Troutman finishing up their scene. Troutman says to let Rambo go, create an opening for him, as Steve was saying, put out a nationwide APB, and then you'll pick him up in a car wash with no incident. Teasel doesn't want to do that. He wants to do his own work. Troutman says if he sends his people in there, they're going to get killed.
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
And Troutman has the line of the movie.
You send that many, don't forget one thing.
What?
A good supply of body bags.
Steve, what a fucking scene between two veteran actors coming in, both of them standing their ground and going toe-to-toe about Rambo. And poor State Police Dave is like, I don't belong in this room right now. What are your thoughts on all of
I think there's one thing that could have made this scene better.
it? What's that?
Milton Berle.
Fuck that, Jackie Mason.
Jackie Mason.
Charles Nelson Riley. Do you want a boy that can't win?
I mean, so it's a fantastic. It is. It's so funny because I remember seeing My Darling Clementine, the John Ford film.
Yeah, great film.
And I was watching it, having watched a lot of Westerns before that. And then I saw the Batwing doors and the shot of Red Eye. And I was like, this movie is filled with cliches. Before realizing like, oh, this is where they're all from.
Yes, exactly.
That's what this scene is. This scene is like, it is a perfect classic scene that we're going to see replicated in all sorts of ways down the line. But I didn't come here to rescue Rambo from you. I came to rescue you from him. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean, I can't think of anyone else playing this role, even though Douglas would have been interesting. George C. Scott would have been interesting with that gravelly voice of his. But there's something about Crenna's delivery. This is the role that made Richard Crenna a household name, like Leslie Nielsen with The Naked Gun. This is the role that made him. And there's a delivery to these lines. And remember, he is being thrown these lines by a production coordinator in these moments because he hasn't fully memorized it. But the emotion that he's able to deliver here, the poignancy, the sharpness of the points that he's making, I think are so fantastic. And the rhythm of the delivery of these lines. As an actor, you're just marveling at how he was able to find rhythmic patterns within the lines to deliver them in such a way that become so iconic and memorable. When he's like, to kill, period. That is an incredible delivery. The body bags line is fantastic. When he says he's trying to eat things that would make a belly go puke, there's a sense of like, you're an idiot. In everything he's saying, you don't understand, as Steve said earlier, you don't understand what you're messing with. You're an idiot. He is going to kill all of you. You don't get what you're asked, or what you don't get what you've bargained for here, because you're going to lose your lives to this guy if you keep pushing it. And I love that. And Teasel is using all the tactics, Steve. He's using all the tactics, right? He's talking about, oh, but look, he's under my jurisdiction. And, what do you know? Or what do you know? Why are you, you're flipping out because one of your guys blew a gasket. That's why you're here. Oh, all shucks. We're some dumb country folk. We're going to do our best. And they're all weak defenses to the reality of it is that he is going to kill all of them. If he wants to kill all of them, he could kill all of them if they keep pushing it. So it's madness. But it's the hubris of men, the ego of men here, because something has come along, as you said earlier, Steve, something has come along to challenge Teasel's authority. He feels emasculated by Rambo. He feels like Rambo is more of a man than he is, so he must take him down in order to retain the order with which he had constructed his world. And so he must destroy Rambo or arrest him or kill him in order to reestablish his authority. It's like animals in the wild, Steve. And as Colonel Troutman has shown up here and gone toe-to-toe with Will Teasel, the sheriff of the town, and let everybody who's watching this film know exactly what we're in for, I think it's a perfect time for us to end part 1 of our discussion of Rambo First Blood here on the Cine-Files.
And of course, we'd love to hear what you think of at least the first part of this discussion, in particular, the incredible hosting of the great John Rocha. This has been so much fun being able to be the passenger on this journey with you. This has been great. And it's been so much fun getting to learn as we go along about the making of this film, because those are some great stories. So you can definitely visit us on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. You can follow the show at Cine_Files on Twitter, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the show, what are you waiting for? You should subscribe to the show, because this is the incredible content you're going to get every single week. You could do it at everywhere you get podcasts, like iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify, even on YouTube. And if you're on iTunes and you had already subscribed to the show, but you had never left a review, why aren't you leaving a review? We do really good work here. We put a lot of effort in, and we would love to get your 5-star reviews. I'll tell you what. The next 5-star we review, I haven't even cleared this with my partner.
No.
We will read the next 5-star review we get on the air of an episode. What do you think?
Nothing wrong with that. I love that idea.
Yeah, we would love that review. We love your comments on YouTube. If you want to buy or stream First Blood along with every other film we've ever reviewed, you can do it at cinephiles.net. And if you want to support the show, we have done massive changes to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/thecine-files. In fact, we're going to have a meeting with our advisory board happening right around when this episode is coming out. So you might even be able to, if you quickly jump onto Patreon, join our advisory board for our next meeting. That's patreon.com/thecine-files. And if you want to reach me, you can do it at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram, and of course, Enterprise Incidents, where we are just finishing the Star Trek, the animated series.
And as for me, you can always reach me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, and my other podcasts, The Geek Buddies and The Hot Mic. They're out there for you all to subscribe to as well. And then I already give my YouTube channel. There's so much going on. I forget sometimes. But if you want to head over to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says. So much to talk about there. Well, thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of our discussion of First Blood. We'll be back with part 2 next week. And we certainly hope you've been enjoying the fact that we've been breaking this one down and stretching it out over 2 parts, because there is so much to discuss. And for my partner, Steve Morris, we'll see you next time with another brand new episode of the Cine-Files.